Emily Carter had always believed that little rewards were important in life. For the past 2 years, she had been juggling long hospital shifts as a nurse in training, part-time classes for her flight nurse certification, and exhausting commutes that drained her time and energy. She wasn't rich, not even close, but she was determined, disciplined, and proud of the small milestones she had achieved along the way. And this trip, her long-awaited cross-country flight from Boston to San Diego, was supposed to be one of those small but deeply meaningful rewards. She had saved up every airline mile, tracked every promotional bonus, and carefully monitored her loyalty account. When she discovered she had just enough points to request an upgrade to first class, she felt an almost childlike excitement. For once, she wouldn't be crammed into the narrow seat of economy, fighting for elbow room and praying the stranger beside her wasn't a chronic snorer. For once, she would enjoy a little comfort, a little breathing space, a glass of champagne she could never justify buying for herself. The morning of her flight, Emily left her tiny apartment with a heart lightened by the thought. She had barely slept, but she didn't care. She rolled her modest carry-on bag through the terminal, humming softly to herself. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her travel sweater hugged her frame against the early chill, and she clutched her boarding pass like a golden ticket. The gate area was already crowded. Business travelers in pressed suits tapped away at laptops, earbuds in place, their faces tense with deadlines. Families wrangled restless children, snacks spilling from plastic bags, strollers folding and unfolding like clumsy origami. And then there was Emily, alone, but glowing with hope. She had no laptop, no expensive luggage, no gold watch on her wrist. But she had her seat, her loyalty points, and the anticipation of being treated, for once, not as a rushed traveler, but as someone worthy of a little luxury. When the gate agent's voice came through the loudspeaker, her pulse quickened. "We are now processing requests for upgrades to first class. Please see the counter if you'd like to be considered." Emily took a deep breath, smoothed her sweater, and walked forward. The line wasn't long. 2 men ahead of her, both in sharp suits, both clearly frequent flyers. She watched as the first man presented his ticket and loyalty card. The agent tapped a few keys, smiled warmly, and handed him a new boarding pass. "Enjoy your seat in first class, Mr. Reynolds," she said cheerfully. He grinned, thanked her, and walked away without a glance back. The second man stepped up, gave his information, and received the same treatment. The agent's tone was warm, friendly, almost deferential. Emily felt her heart skip. Soon it would be her turn. When she reached the counter, she placed her boarding pass down carefully. "Hi," she said, keeping her voice light. "I'd like to check if my request for an upgrade went through. I've got miles saved up, and I saw online that a few seats might still be open." The gate agent barely glanced at her. She didn't smile. She didn't ask for Emily's loyalty number. Instead, she clicked her keyboard briskly, sighed, and said flatly, "Not available for you." Emily blinked. "Oh, are they already taken?" she asked politely, still trying to keep her tone respectful. The agent's eyes flicked up for half a second, then back to her screen. "You don't qualify. Next, please." It was like being slapped. No explanation, no apology, not even the courtesy of checking. Emily froze for a moment, then realized another passenger had already stepped forward beside her. Embarrassed, she murmured, "Thank you," and stepped away, clutching her boarding pass as though it were suddenly a worthless scrap of paper. She sank back into her seat at the gate area, cheeks burning. She told herself not to cry, not to make a scene. It was silly, really. It was just a seat, just an airline perk. But the sting was deeper than she expected. It wasn't about champagne or legroom. It was about being treated like she mattered, like her effort, her loyalty, her sacrifice meant something. And then came the part that made her blood run cold. As she sat there, trying to gather her dignity, she watched. A young woman in high heels and designer sunglasses, clearly new to the airline, approached the counter. Emily overheard her giggling, saying she wasn't even sure if she had signed up for the miles thing yet. The gate agent laughed with her, tapped a few keys, and handed her an upgraded ticket. Moments later, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt ambled up, explaining he wasn't even on the loyalty program, but wanted to ask if anything was open up front. The gate agent gave him a sympathetic smile and said, "You're in luck. We've got one seat left." She printed the ticket and wished him a pleasant flight. Emily sat frozen, watching. She couldn't comprehend it. She had the points. She had the miles. She had followed the rules. And yet she had been brushed off without a second thought, while others less qualified were waved through. Her chest tightened. She shifted in her chair, crossing her arms over herself as if to shield against the humiliation. Around her, a few other passengers had noticed too. A young couple whispered, casting sympathetic glances in her direction. One older man shook his head as though disgusted, but no one spoke up. She pulled her book from her bag, opening it to a random page, pretending to read. Her eyes, however, blurred over the words. All she could see was that counter, that dismissive glance, that single phrase, "Not available for you." She tried to remind herself of the truth. She wasn't entitled to luxury. She wasn't entitled to special treatment. But what she had expected, what she had hoped for, was fairness, and that had been stripped away, leaving her not only disappointed but invisible. The boarding announcement began. "We are now inviting our first-class passengers to board." The line formed quickly, a parade of suits, designer bags, and polished shoes. Emily stayed seated, hugging her carry-on against her knees. Each person who walked past seemed to drive the sting deeper. They belonged. She didn't. When her group was finally called, she rose quietly, her shoulders tight, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with the recycled scent of fuel. As she walked past the curtain into the economy cabin, she forced herself not to glance at the spacious seats she'd been denied. She slid into her assigned spot halfway back, between a weary-looking mother with a toddler and a man already sprawled with headphones blasting faint music. She set her back down, folded her hands in her lap, and took a breath. This was where she belonged, she told herself. Not in first class. Not with champagne and comfort. This was her seat, narrow, cramped, ordinary, and yet, as the flight attendants moved past her with forced smiles, Emily couldn't help but feel the sharp sting of injustice still burning inside her chest. Little did she know, this disappointment was only the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Emily shifted in her narrow seat, trying to bury her disappointment beneath the hum of boarding chatter. She had convinced herself to accept it. After all, she wasn't entitled to anything more than what she had paid for. A seat on the plane was a seat on the plane, whether at the front or in the cramped middle rows. Still, her chest ached as she replayed the brief, curt exchange with the gate agent. The words clung to her like static. Not available for you. Not all full. Not I'm sorry. Not even a neutral unfortunately. There are no seats left. Just a dismissal, stripped bare of courtesy, as though she had no right to ask in the first place. They asked the last groups boarded. Emily's eyes wandered to the aisle, and she noticed something that unsettled her further. Passengers who had been behind her in line, those she had seen upgraded moments after she was refused, were now gliding into the plush leather seats up front. She caught a glimpse before the curtain was pulled. A young woman with glossy hair taking selfies with her champagne, a man already reclining and pulling a silk eye mask over his face, another chatting animatedly with a flight attendant who seemed more like a personal host than crew. Emily tore her eyes away, ashamed of her own curiosity. Don't look, she scolded herself. It's not your place. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't quiet the sting of injustice gnawing at her. She had done everything right, hadn't she? She had been loyal to this airline for years, choosing their cramped flights over cheaper competitors because she believed her points would matter someday. She had studied the fine print, tracked her account, carefully planned this request. And still, when the chance finally came, she was told with a dismissive shrug that she didn't qualify. The man in the seat beside her adjusted his headphones and glanced at her briefly. He must have noticed her tense shoulders, the way she pressed her lips together. You all right? He asked casually, though his tone was distracted. Emily forced a small smile. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a long day. He nodded and returned to his music, uninterested. But she caught, in the reflection of the window, a woman who rose up leaning toward her partner and whispering something. The partner shook his head slowly, his face marked with quiet disapproval. Emily realized they had seen it too. The way she'd been dismissed, the aircraft doors closed with a hiss, and the attendants began their safety demonstration. But Emily's mind wasn't on the oxygen masks or the life vest tucked beneath her seat. Her eyes wandered up the aisle again, just in time to see a late passenger being ushered into first class. He was a middle-aged man in khakis and a polo, his hair slightly mussed as if he'd run to the gate. He carried no loyalty card, no air of privilege, yet the attendant smiled warmly, guiding him into the front row with a kind pat on the shoulder. Emily's breath caught. How? She wanted to ask aloud. How could someone walk up at the last minute, without even trying, and be given what she had begged for? She turned her gaze back to the safety card at her lap, but the letters blurred together. She wasn't jealous, at least. She didn't think she was. She wasn't angry at those passengers for enjoying what they had been given. No, what unsettled her was something deeper. The sense that she had been deliberately excluded, brushed aside as though she didn't belong in the same category as them. The plane began to taxi, the engines roaring beneath the floor. Emily gripped her armrest as the familiar vibration rattled her bones. Flying always made her nervous, though she tried to hide it. This was part of why she wanted to become a flight nurse, to confront that fear, to master it, to turn the sky into a place where she could help others instead of sitting helplessly strapped to a seat. As the plane lifted off, pressing her back into the cushion, she took a deep breath and forced herself to focus. But when the seatbelt sign blinked off and the attendants began moving down the aisle, the divide between first class and economy became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the seats, or the free drinks, or the meals served on porcelain instead of plastic. It was the way the attendants spoke. Up front, their voices carried warmth, attentiveness, even laughter. They leaned close, listened carefully, as though every passenger was a guest of honor. Back here, in economy, their tone flattened into rehearsed politeness. Chicken or pasta? Water, juice, or soda? Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Emily folded her tray table down and stared at the plastic cup of water placed before her. She sipped it slowly, trying to pretend she didn't care. But the contrast gnawed at her. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about being seen. The passengers up front were treated as if they mattered, as if their presence was valuable. Back here, she and the others were processed, managed, tolerated. Her thoughts drifted back to the gate. She remembered the young woman in sunglasses, laughing as she admitted she didn't even know if she was signed up for the loyalty program. She remembered the man in khakis, ushered into comfort with a smile. And she remembered her own moment, standing at the counter, the agent not even bothering to look her in the eye. Why me? She wondered. What was it about me that made her decide I didn't belong? Was it my clothes? My voice? The fact that I wasn't important enough? Her stomach tightened, not from hunger, but from a deep, gnawing ache of exclusion. She looked around at her fellow passengers in economy. The mother beside her was bouncing a toddler on her lap, trying to keep him from crying. A college student across the aisle was cramming for an exam, highlighter in hand. An elderly man a few rows back was rubbing his temples, clearly in pain from the cramped space. These were her companions, her equals, her people. None of them looked like they were asking for luxury. They just wanted to get where they were going. But still, she couldn't shake the thought. Why was it so easy for some to be lifted above the rest, while others were left here, no matter how hard they worked? The unfairness burned in her chest, sharper than before. She wanted to let it go, but the memory kept circling back, relentless. As the attendants began serving meals, the curtains separating first class from economy fluttered briefly. Emily caught a glimpse inside, wine glasses raised, trays filled with carefully plated dishes, passengers laughing with each other like old friends at a dinner party. Her eyes fell to the foil-covered tray placed in front of her. A mushy rectangle of pasta, plastic cutlery, a tiny packet of butter beside a cold roll. She tried to swallow the bitterness with her first bite, but the taste seemed duller than usual. It wasn't the food. It wasn't the seat. It was the feeling of being dismissed, of being invisible. And as the hour stretched ahead, she couldn't help but wonder if anyone else on this plane truly saw her for who she was, or if she was destined to remain overlooked, passed over, and quietly dismissed in a world that measured worth by appearance, status, and convenience. What Emily didn't yet realize was that her quiet despair had not gone unnoticed. A pair of watchful eyes a few rows back had caught the exchange at the gate, had seen the flicker of pain on her face, and had recognized it instantly. For now, though, she sat in silence, staring out the small oval window, watching the endless sky stretch beyond her, and wondering why some doors opened so easily for others, while hers always seemed to stay locked. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a steady vibration beneath Emily's feet as the plane cut smoothly through the clouds. She pressed her forehead lightly to the window, watching sunlight flicker across the endless horizon, a world both vast and isolating. She had almost convinced herself to sink into the rhythm of the flight, accept the disappointment, endure the hours, and put the memory of the gate agent's dismissive tone behind her. But the truth gnawed at her. It wasn't just the lost upgrade. It was the way she had been looked at. Or rather, not looked at all. The simple denial still stung. Not available for you. She could almost hear the unspoken words. Not for someone like you. She closed her eyes, determined not to dwell, when movement in the aisle caught her attention. A tall man walked steadily down the row, his presence so commanding that Emily, and half the passengers near her, instinctively turned to look. He wasn't in a suit like the business travelers. He wasn't casually dressed like the vacationers either. He wore simple, pressed civilian clothes, but there was something unmistakable about him. The way he carried himself. His back was straight, his steps purposeful yet unhurried, his eyes sharp but calm. He stowed his bag in the overhead compartment a few rows behind her, then lowered himself into his seat with quiet precision. Even this small motion seemed deliberate, practiced. Emily didn't know who he was yet, but something about him radiated authority. Not the arrogant kind she had seen in corporate managers who barked into phones, but a steadier, grounded authority that seemed earned rather than assumed. As the flight attendants made their first pass through the cabin, she noticed the man exchange a polite nod with one of them. The attendant's demeanor shifted subtly, less rushed, more respectful, almost deferential. Emily's curiosity sparked. Who was he? Her question was soon answered when the man leaned slightly into the aisle, catching sight of her seat. He must have recognized her from the gate earlier, because his eyes lingered, thoughtful. Their gazes met for a moment, and Emily quickly looked away, embarrassed at being caught staring. But then his voice, calm and steady, carried forward. Rough day. Emily blinked, surprised. She turned her head just enough to see him watching her, his expression neutral but kind. She hesitated, caught between honesty and the instinct to brush things off. Something like that, she admitted softly. The man's eyes didn't waver. They were the kind of eyes that saw details others missed. At the counter? He asked. His tone wasn't prying, but certain, like someone who had already observed more than he let on. Heat rushed to her cheeks. So he had seen. Her moment of humiliation hadn't been as private as she hoped. Yeah, she said, trying to make light of it. I asked about an upgrade. Didn't go too well. The corners of his mouth curved slightly, not in amusement but in empathy. I noticed, he said simply. Didn't seem very fair. The matter-of-fact way he stated it caught her off guard. Most people would have brushed it off, or worse, told her not to take it personally. But his words acknowledged her experience directly, without question. Something inside her softened. I guess I didn't qualify, she said, repeating the agent's words with a weak smile. The man shook his head slightly. Sometimes people make decisions for reasons that don't make sense. That doesn't mean you didn't deserve better. Emily studied him more carefully now. His presence was calming, steady, as though he carried invisible weight, but managed it with ease. There was no arrogance in his tone, no pity either, just certainty. She gathered the courage to ask, Are you military? The question seemed to amuse him, if only slightly. Something like that, he said, before offering his hand across the aisle. Commander James Walker, Navy SEAL pilot. Her eyes widened. She had heard stories of Navy SEALs, elites trained to operate in impossible conditions, the best of the best. She shook his hand, noting the strength in his grip, firm but controlled. Emily Carter, she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. Nurse in training. I'm working toward becoming a flight nurse. That caught his attention. His brows lifted slightly, and he leaned in just a bit. A flight nurse. Yeah, Emily said, surprised at her own eagerness to explain. I've always been a little nervous flying, but I wanted to face that fear. And I figured if I could help people in the air, when they're at their most vulnerable, it would mean something. Sometimes a minute makes the difference between life and death. If I could be there in that minute, her voice trailed off, unsure why she was sharing so much with a stranger. But Walker wasn't looking at her like she was rambling. He was listening intently, the way someone listens in a briefing where every detail matters. That takes guts, he said finally. Facing the thing that scares you, and making it your mission to help others in that space. That's strength, Emily. The way he said her name startled her. Few people said it like that, measured, deliberate, as though the name itself carried weight. Emily glanced down at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of her tray table. Most people just think I'm crazy, she admitted. Most people don't understand courage until they need it, Walker replied. I've flown missions where the only reason guys made it home was because someone like you was there. A medic who stayed calm. A nurse who didn't freeze up when things got bad. You may think you're just training, but trust me, you've got the right mindset. Emily felt a warmth in her chest that hadn't been there since before the flight began. For the first time all day, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, truly seen, for what she was trying to become, not just dismissed for what she wasn't. Their conversation paused as the flight attendants returned with carts, passing out drinks and small snacks. The curtain at the front of the cabin fluttered again, revealing a glimpse of first class, gleaming wine glasses, relaxed laughter, trays of steaming food. Emily caught the sight, her stomach twisting briefly, but Walker noticed. He followed her gaze, then shook his head with quiet amusement. Don't measure yourself against what's behind that curtain, he said. A wide seat and a free drink don't mean much. I've flown in the tightest cockpits imaginable, sometimes for hours, no room to move. But the view out the window, the purpose of the mission, that's what matters. She turned back to him, caught by his words. Easy for you to say, she teased gently. You've probably seen more of the world from a cockpit than I ever will. His expression softened. Maybe. But I can tell you this. Worth isn't measured by a seat assignment. It's measured by what you do when it counts. And from what I've heard, you've got what it takes to matter when it counts. The hum of the engines filled the pause between them, but it no longer felt heavy. For the first time that day, Emily's shoulders eased. She found herself smiling, a genuine smile she hadn't managed since stepping up to that gate counter. Perhaps this flight wasn't going to be as ordinary as she thought. The steady drone of the engines filled the cabin like background music, a constant hum that most passengers soon tuned out. Emily, however, found herself oddly comforted by it. It reminded her of a heartbeat, steady and persistent, keeping the vessel alive as it carved through the sky. And sitting across the aisle, Commander James Walker seemed as grounded and calm as if he were still on solid earth. Their earlier exchange had shifted something in her mood. The sting of humiliation at the gate wasn't gone, but it was softer now, blurred by the unexpected kindness of a stranger. She couldn't help but steal glances at him, curious about the life behind those steady eyes. Walker caught her glance once, and instead of looking away, he leaned forward slightly. So, he said, his voice low enough to keep the conversation private. Tell me more about this. Flight nursing, was it? Emily hesitated. Most people barely let her get 2 sentences in before changing the subject, uninterested in her goals. But Walker's tone was different. He wasn't making small talk. He was inviting her to share. She nodded. Yeah, I've been working as a nurse in training for a while now. It's exhausting, honestly. Long shifts, endless classes, and you see things that stay with you. But becoming a flight nurse, that's the goal. Why that? Walker asked, not dismissively, but with genuine curiosity. Emily bit her lip, choosing her words carefully. Because people don't get to choose when emergencies happen. A car accident on a rural highway, a heart attack midair, a disaster where ground hospitals are too far away. Flight medics and nurses are often the bridge, the difference between someone surviving and someone not making it. I've seen the aftermath of delays, and I don't want to just watch. I want to be the one who buys time, who keeps someone alive until they get what they need. As she spoke, her voice grew steadier, more passionate. She hadn't meant to pour her heart out, but Walker's quiet attention drew the words out like a tide. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. That's not just a career, he said. That's a calling. The sincerity in his tone made Emily's throat tighten. Most people smiled politely when she described her dream, maybe called it admirable, but none had ever framed it as he just did. And what about you? She asked, curious now. You said you're a SEAL pilot. That sounds intense. Walker's gaze drifted briefly to the window, where sunlight streaked the wing in gold. For a moment, his eyes seemed far away, looking not at the clouds, but at memories Emily couldn't see. It is, he said finally. Intense, dangerous, unpredictable. But it's also a privilege. Flying isn't just about the machine. It's about the lives you carry, the missions you protect, the team that depends on you. I've flown men into places they weren't sure they'd come back from. I've flown them out when they were broken, bleeding, and barely alive. And I've trusted medics like you to keep them breathing when I couldn't. His voice carried no bravado, no need to impress. It was matter of fact, grounded in experience. But beneath the calm, Emily heard something else. Wait, these weren't just stories. They were scars, memories etched into him like invisible lines. She leaned forward, resting her elbow on the armrest. That must be hard, she said softly, carrying all that. Walker's eyes met hers again, sharp and steady. It is. But you don't do it alone. That's the thing about missions, about life, really. You survive because someone else is there when it matters. You keep each other alive. Emily felt the truth in his words resonate with her own. She thought of long nights in the hospital, when exhaustion pressed down like a weight, and the only thing keeping her moving was the knowledge that her team depended on her. You sound like you've seen a lot, she said gently. That he gave the faintest smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Enough to know that respect isn't optional. When things fall apart, you can't afford arrogance or dismissal. Every person has value. Every role matters. That's why what happened to you back there, at the gate, it stuck with me. Emily blinked. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again. You mean the upgrade thing? Walker nodded. It wasn't about the seat. It was the way they treated you. Like you didn't matter. And I've seen where that attitude leads, Emily. It's dangerous. The moment people start deciding who counts and who doesn't, they put lives at risk. His words struck deeper than she expected. She had framed the incident as a small personal humiliation, something she just had to shrug off. But Walker reframed it, placing it in a larger pattern, one where being dismissed wasn't just unfair, but wrong. For a while, they sat in silence, the hum of the engines filling the gap. Emily found herself watching him, the way his hands rested calmly on his knees, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that hinted at both fatigue and wisdom. She wondered how many nights he had spent awake, how many flights had carried him through danger while others slept unaware. You know, she said finally, most people don't talk about respect the way you do. At least, not outside of a motivational poster. Walker chuckled softly. That's because most people don't have to bet their lives on it. In the field, you respect everyone. The guy flying the bird, the medic patching wounds, the rookie carrying gear. You don't get to pick and choose who matters. If you forget that, you don't last long. Emily's chest tightened, not from sadness, but from the weight of his conviction. Here was a man who had seen the worst of the world, yet still believed in the simple, stubborn value of human dignity. You sound like a good leader, she said quietly. He gave her a wry look. I try. But a good leader isn't someone who always knows what to do. It's someone who knows when to listen, when to trust, and sometimes when to hand control over to the person best suited for the moment. Emily thought about that, her mind drifting to her own training. There were times when she had frozen, unsure of herself, only to have a senior nurse step in with calm authority. And there were other times when she had surprised herself, stepping forward because no one else could. You think I could be that person someday? She asked before she could stop herself. Walker didn't hesitate. I don't think you already are. You wouldn't be chasing this path if you weren't. Fear doesn't stop you. It fuels you. That's rare. Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her instructors, not her peers, not even her family. In his voice, she heard not just encouragement, but belief. Genuine belief. She smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. You don't even know me, she said. That Walker's expression softened. Sometimes it doesn't take long to see someone's character. It shows in how you carry yourself when you're overlooked, and how you talk about what you care about to years who never revealed as much as you have in the last 10 minutes. Emily laughed lightly, not out of humor, but out of disbelief. I guess I'm not good at hiding what I care about. That's a strength, not a weakness, he replied. The conversation lingered, weaving between stories of long hospital nights and tales of harrowing flights. Emily found herself opening up about her fears, the patients she couldn't save, the weight of responsibility, the nagging doubt that she wasn't strong enough. And Walker, in turn, shared glimpses of his own battles, not just the missions, but the quiet moments afterward, when the adrenaline faded and the silence pressed. By the time the cabin lights dimmed and passengers settled in for the long flight, Emily no longer felt the sting of rejection. She felt something far more surprising, connection, for the first time all day. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not just by anyone, but by someone who understood the weight of responsibility, the meaning of courage, and the value of being recognized when it mattered most. And though she didn't know it yet, this chance encounter was about to carry her into a moment she would never forget. The cabin had grown quiet. Hours into the flight, most passengers had settled into a rhythm, movies flickering on tiny screens, the rustle of snack wrappers, the occasional cough breaking through the steady hum of the engines. Dimmed lights washed the rows in a soft twilight, encouraging drowsiness even though it was still daylight beyond the windows. Emily sat back with her book open but unread. Her conversation with Commander Walker lingered in her thoughts, looping in fragments. Respect isn't optional. You've already got the mindset. Fear doesn't stop you, it fuels you. Words she didn't expect to hear on a routine flight. Words that carried more weight than the plastic cup of water balanced on her tray. She found herself sneaking another glance at him. He was calm, as always, sitting with a posture that seemed effortless, yet precise. His eyes were closed, but she doubted he was asleep. There was a presence about him, a readiness, as if even in rest, he was aware of every sound, every shift in the air. And then it happened. The first jolt was small, a sudden dip that made a few passengers glance up from their screens. Emily tightened her grip on the armrest, heart giving a nervous flutter. She had flown often enough to recognize the start of turbulence, but the tension in the air told her this was more than just a mild bump. The second jolt came harder. The overhead bins rattled, drinks sloshed in cups, and a startled cry rose from somewhere near the back. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, steady but clipped. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately. Flight attendants, take your seats. The attendants, who only moments ago were distributing drinks, quickly stowed carts and hurried to their stations. The curtain at the front swayed as the plane lurched again, harder this time. A chorus of gasps filled the cabin. Emily's stomach tightened, her pulse pounding in her ears. She hated turbulence, always had. No amount of training or rational thought could completely erase the instinctive fear when the floor dropped beneath her, when the wings groaned against invisible currents. She gripped the armrests, forcing herself to breathe. This is what you wanted to face, she reminded herself. This is why you're training. A child's shriek pierced the air. 2 rows ahead, a little boy clung to his seatbelt, his small hands trembling as he sobbed. His mother tried to soothe him, but she was pale herself, knuckles white as she clutched the seat back in front of her. Without thinking, Emily unbuckled her belt just long enough to lean forward across the aisle. Hey, she said gently, catching the boy's eyes. Her voice carried steady warmth, despite the tremors in her chest. You're okay. It's just a bumpy road in the sky, like when a car hits a pothole. Nothing scary, I promise. The boy hiccuped through his tears, staring at her. Look at me, Emily urged softly. Hold my hand if you want. We'll get through this together. He hesitated, then stretched a tiny hand across the aisle. Emily reached out, gripping it firmly. His shaking eased slightly under her steady touch. The plane jolted again, rattling violently. A few passengers cried out, one muttering a frantic prayer under his breath. Overhead lights flickered once, then steadied. Emily forced herself to remain calm, her own fear shoved aside for the child's sake. "See, still here," she told him gently. "Still safe." Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Walker watching. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze lingered on her steady hand, her calm voice cutting through the rising panic. When the turbulence intensified, Emily adjusted her posture instinctively, shoulders back, breath controlled, tone unshaken. She had seen enough fear in emergency rooms to know that calm was contagious. If she panicked, the boy would spiral. If she remained steady, he would borrow her strength. "Close your eyes," she told him softly. "Pretend you're on a roller coaster. Some people even like this part." She smiled gently, and though it wasn't entirely true for her, the boy managed a weak laugh through his tears. The minutes stretched like hours. The plane bucked and swayed, metal groaning as though alive. Every lurch sent whispers and gasps rippling through the cabin. But Emily kept her focus locked on the boy, on her breathing, on her voice. She became an anchor in the storm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the turbulence began to ease. The violent jolts softened into small bumps, then into the steady hum of smooth air. Passengers sighed audibly, some even applauded weakly, though the attendants remained strapped in, their faces tight. The captain's voice returned, calmer now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've passed through the rough patch. We appreciate your patience. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off." A collective exhale rippled through the cabin. Emily squeezed the boy's hand one last time before releasing it. "See, all done," she said softly. His mother mouthed a grateful thank you, her eyes glassy with relief. Emily sat back, finally allowing herself to feel the tension in her chest. Her hands trembled faintly as she clasped them in her lap. Fear lingered, but beneath it was something else, pride. She had stayed calm. She had helped. She had done what she hoped one day to do as a flight nurse. A low voice interrupted her thoughts. "Impressive," Walker said quietly across the aisle. She glanced at him, startled. "What?" "The way you handled that," he said. "Not just for the boy, but for everyone watching. You held yourself steady when others couldn't. That matters." Emily shook her head, embarrassed. I didn't want him to be scared." "That's what makes it impressive," Walker replied. His gaze was steady, his words carrying weight. "Fear doesn't go away. It's what you do with it that counts. You turned yours into strength for someone else." Emily swallowed, her chest tightening. Not from fear this time, but from the gravity in his voice. For a fleeting moment, she saw herself through his eyes. Not invisible, not dismissed, but capable. Strong. Walker leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Most people, when turbulence hits, they think of themselves. You thought of someone else. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." Her cheeks warmed, and she lowered her gaze. Praise wasn't something she was used to, not outside of clinical evaluations or polite platitudes. But coming from him, a man who had seen courage in its rawest forms, it meant more than she could articulate. The rest of the cabin slowly settled back into normalcy. Attendants resumed service. Passengers murmured about the scare. Laughter returned in small bursts. But Emily felt the shift inside herself. The turbulence had shaken more than the plane. It had stirred something within her, something that Walker's words solidified. She wasn't just a passenger overlooked at a gate counter. She wasn't just someone denied a seat. She was someone who could make a difference in the moments that mattered. Someone who could steady others even when her own heart was pounding. And Walker, watching quietly, knew it too. The flight had returned to its rhythm, but the calm felt fragile, as though the cabin itself still remembered the storm it had just endured. Passengers leaned back with weary smiles, some laughing off their nerves, others pulling blankets tighter as if to anchor themselves in safety. Emily sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, her heart still echoing with the turbulence. She couldn't shake Walker's words. Fear doesn't go away. It's what you do with it that counts. They repeated in her head like a mantra, turning over and over until they settled into something steadier than she expected. Belief. She had never felt so seen, not even during her nursing rotations when supervisors praised her technical skills. This was different. Walker wasn't commenting on her performance. He was affirming her character. She exhaled softly, turning her gaze to the aisle. That was when she noticed Walker shift in his seat. He had been calm through everything, but now there was a purpose to his movements, a decision forming in his posture. He glanced once at her, then rose smoothly, towering in the narrow space. The seatbelt light was still illuminated, but he didn't seem the type to be bound by it. Passengers looked up as he moved toward the front, curiosity sparking in their eyes. Emily frowned slightly, watching. Where is he going? Walker reached the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the cabin. He drew it back without hesitation, stepping into the exclusive section as though he belonged there. Heads turned immediately, some in irritation, others in fascination. The attendant stationed at the galley raised a hand. Sir, I'm sorry, but you can't. Walker held up a small leather case, flipping it open with one practiced motion. A glint of gold and a flash of official insignia caught the light. The attendant's words faltered. Her eyes widened, scanning the badge, then flicking to his face. Commander James Walker, he said evenly. Navy SEAL pilot. I'd like a word with your captain. The authority in his voice was quiet, not loud or aggressive, but it carried the kind of weight that silenced any argument. Passengers in first class leaned forward, suddenly attentive. The attendant nodded quickly, her tone shifting. Of course, Commander. One moment. She disappeared into the cockpit, and for a brief silence, the entire section seemed suspended in anticipation. Emily leaned slightly into the aisle, her pulse quickening. She had never seen anything like it. The way Walker's presence rewrote the rules of the space around him. When the cockpit door opened, the captain himself emerged, his crisp uniform immaculate, despite the turbulence. His eyes swept over Walker, then down to the badge still visible in his hand. He extended a hand with immediate respect. Commander Walker, the captain said. Didn't realize we had you on board. What can I do for you? Walker shook his hand firmly. I'd like to request something unusual, he said. There's a passenger back there, Emily Carter. She's a nurse in training, with aspirations to become a flight nurse. During turbulence, she showed remarkable composure, calming a child when the cabin crew couldn't reach him. She deserves recognition, and more than that, she deserves respect. The captain's brow furrowed slightly, curious, but cautious. Respect is always due, Commander. What are you asking? Walker's voice didn't waver. Give her a seat where she belongs, not behind a curtain, not treated as lesser. If there's no first-class seat, then let her sit in the jump seat, here in the cockpit. Let her see what it looks like from our perspective. Gasps rippled through both cabins. Even the first-class passengers, so accustomed to privilege, shifted uncomfortably, surprised at the audacity of the request. A woman clutched her pearls, muttering something about regulations, while a man shook his head in disbelief. Emily, frozen in her economy seat, felt her face flush hot. The cockpit, her stomach twisted with shock, fear, and an inexplicable spark of wonder. The captain hesitated, weighing the situation. Regulations were strict, but Walker's presence, his credentials, and the steady conviction in his tone created a gravity that was hard to resist. Finally, the captain nodded slowly. For you, Commander, I can make an exception, but only if the passenger is willing. Walker inclined his head in thanks, then turned back toward the cabin. His eyes sought Emily's instantly, as if he had known all along where she was watching. His voice carried, calm and certain. Emily, he called, come with me. The entire cabin turned in unison, hundreds of eyes fixing on her. For a moment, the air seemed to vanish from her lungs. She wanted to sink into the seat, to hide behind the anonymity she had worn for so long. But Walker's gaze held hers, steady, unwavering. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her screamed no, begged her to stay put, to avoid the weight of so many eyes. But another part, the part Walker had touched with his words, rose higher. Her legs moved before she could think. She unbuckled her belt, rose slowly, and stepped into the aisle. Passengers whispered, some murmuring in envy, others in confusion. She walked past them all, her steps shaky at first, then steadier as she drew closer to him. Walker stood waiting, the curtain still held open. When she reached him, his hand brushed lightly against her arm, not guiding, but reassuring. "You've already proven yourself back there," he said softly, only for her to hear. "Now it's time you saw what it feels like up here." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to protest, to thank him, but no words came. She nodded instead, the gesture small but full of weight. The captain gave her a measured smile. "Miss Carter, welcome to the front of the plane." He led her into the cockpit. The space was smaller than she imagined, filled with glowing panels, switches, and the steady rhythm of blinking lights. Two pilots sat poised at the controls, their hands moving with precision. The view beyond the windshield stretched endlessly, sky and horizon, vast and breathtaking. Emily inhaled sharply, off-flooding her chest. This wasn't just a seat. This was perspective, possibility. The place she had once feared most now opened before her as something extraordinary. Walker stood just behind her, his voice low but certain. "Not so bad, is it?" She turned slightly, eyes wide. "It's incredible." For the first time since boarding, Emily didn't feel like an outsider. She didn't feel like someone denied or dismissed. She felt worthy. She felt like she belonged, because someone had believed in her enough to put her here. And Walker, watching her reaction, knew the bold gesture had been worth it. The door shut softly behind her, sealing Emily into a world very few passengers ever glimpsed. The cockpit was smaller than she imagined, intimate, almost claustrophobic, yet alive with purpose. Lights blinked in precise rhythm, instruments glowed with quiet authority, and the faint hiss of the radio carried voices from unseen controllers hundreds of miles away. Every surface hummed with responsibility. Emily's breath caught as she took it all in. It wasn't just a room. It was the beating heart of the plane, the place where trust and skill kept hundreds of lives aloft. She had spent her whole life staring at the backs of seats, hemmed in by narrow aisles and the static murmur of safety demonstrations. But now before her, the sky itself was the view, endless, vast, and shockingly close. The captain gestured toward the fold-down jump seat tucked just behind the co-pilot. "Go ahead, have a seat, Miss Carter." Her hands trembled slightly as she eased herself into it. The fabric was stiff, utilitarian, and the harness straps were thicker than anything in the cabin. She buckled them with fumbling fingers, every click echoing in her chest like a drumbeat. The captain returned to his controls with practiced ease. "We'll be cruising for another 3 hours before descent. Nothing unusual on the radar now." The co-pilot nodded, flipping a switch, his voice calm but clipped. Emily marveled at their focus, their wordless coordination. This was a language she didn't understand yet but longed to. And then she felt it, the faint brush of a presence beside her. Walker had stepped in behind her, leaning casually against the bulkhead. He didn't intrude, didn't overshadow, but somehow filled the space with calm authority. "How's the view?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough not to disturb the pilots. Emily swallowed, her eyes locked on the expanse outside. "It's overwhelming. Beautiful. I don't even have words." Walker's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "First time in the cockpit does that to you. It's the kind of perspective you don't forget." Her pulse raced. She felt like a child staring at the stars for the first time, caught between awe and disbelief. The fear she'd felt during turbulence seemed laughable now, dwarfed by the sheer magnitude of the sky stretching endlessly beyond the windshield. "Do you see it?" Walker asked, gesturing subtly toward the horizon. Emily tilted her head. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the clouds in streaks of gold and rose. The curve of the earth stretched impossibly far, the thin line of atmosphere glowing faintly. "It looks fragile," she whispered. "It is," Walker replied. "Flying reminds you of that. Life, people, the world, it all feels fragile. But that fragility isn't weakness. It's what makes protecting it worth something." His words hung in the air, heavy and yet liberating. Emily glanced back at him, and for the first time, she understood why his presence felt different. He wasn't just a soldier. He was someone who carried the weight of protecting fragility, who had chosen responsibility when most people chose comfort. The captain adjusted a dial, drawing her attention back to the panel. The instruments fascinated her, numbers flickering, needles steady, digital readouts dancing with precision. "What does that one mean?" she asked softly, pointing. The co-pilot smiled faintly without turning his head. "Altitude indicator. Keeps us level, even when you can't trust your senses." Emily leaned closer, intrigued. "And that?" "Fuel flow. Rate at which we're burning through reserves." Bit by bit, they explained, their voices patient. She absorbed every word, not because she needed to know, but because she wanted to. Knowledge here felt empowering, a glimpse into a world where fear and control danced hand in hand. Walker's voice joined theirs, adding depth. Notice how they never stopped scanning. Eyes always moving, hands always ready. That's discipline. You don't wait for problems to come to you. You anticipate them. Emily nodded slowly, letting the lesson sink deeper than the mechanics. It wasn't about dials or switches. It was about vigilance, responsibility, presence. Minutes stretched into an hour, yet time seemed to fold in on itself. She forgot the cramped seat, forgot the stares of passengers left behind the curtain. All that existed was sky and silence, punctuated by the quiet hum of professionals at work. At one point, the plane banked gently, turning toward a new course. The horizon tilted, clouds shifting in perspective. Emily gasped, gripping her harness instinctively. Walker chuckled softly behind her. "That's control, not chaos. Big difference." She exhaled, forcing her shoulders to relax. "I can't imagine being the one holding that much responsibility." "You just did," Walker said evenly. She glanced back, startled. "What do you mean?" "You took responsibility back there during turbulence," he said, eyes steady on hers. "Different setting, same principle. You stayed calm when others couldn't. You gave someone else strength when they had none. That's all this is, applied in a cockpit instead of a cabin." Her chest tightened. She wanted to protest, to dismiss it as exaggeration, but the certainty in his tone silenced her doubts. He wasn't flattering her. He was telling the truth as he saw it. The sun dipped lower, painting the world in shades of fire and shadow. Emily sat transfixed, watching continents of clouds drift lazily beneath them. The beauty of it was almost unbearable. "This," she murmured, "feels like freedom." Walker's expression softened. "That's because it is. Up here, borders don't matter. Politics don't matter. It's just you, the machine, and the sky. The kind of clarity most people never get to experience." She let the words sink in, the silence stretching comfortably between them. For the first time in her life, Emily felt more than a passenger. She felt like she had stepped through a door into possibility, into a version of herself that had been waiting patiently all along. When the cockpit door finally opened again, it was the attendant, reminding them that regulations required visitors to return to their seats. Emily felt a pang of disappointment as she unbuckled, reluctant to leave. But as she stepped out, Walker leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Remember this moment," he said. "Next time you doubt yourself, remember that you sat in the cockpit, and you belonged there." Her throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, but words felt too small for the enormity of what she carried in her chest. Instead, she met his eyes, and in that brief connection, gratitude spoke louder than any phrase could. Emily walked back down the aisle, past curious eyes and whispered speculation. But she didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel like the girl who had been refused a seat in first class. She felt like someone who had glimpsed the horizon and claimed a piece of it for herself. And Walker, watching her from the shadows of the front cabin, knew she would never see herself, or the world, the same way again. The cabin lights dimmed as the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice, steady and calm, filled the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent. Weather in Chicago is clear, with a light breeze out of the west. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing." The announcement sent a ripple through the passengers. Conversations quieted, laptops clicked shut, window shades lifted. A kind of collective anticipation swept through the aircraft. An unspoken relief that the long journey was nearing its end for Emily, though. It felt like something much greater. She wasn't just preparing to land. She was preparing to step back into the world as someone different from the woman who had boarded hours earlier. She sat in her seat, hands resting in her lap, still feeling the ghost of the cockpit harness against her shoulders. The memory of the horizon, the fragile, glowing curve of the earth, burned bright in her chest. Her heart beat calmer now, steady with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Around her, passengers whispered about her. She heard snippets, though she pretended not to. The girl who went into the cockpit must know someone important. Commander Walker spoke for her. Instead of shame or fear, Emily felt something unexpected: pride. She had been seen, and not just seen, but lifted into a place of honor, not for status or privilege, but for who she was. That a shadow fell across a row. Walker had returned from the front and slid into his seat. He carried no trace of arrogance, no sense that he had just altered the course of a stranger's life. He buckled his belt with the same quiet efficiency as always. Emily glanced at him, her voice soft. "Thank you." He tilted his head, eyes steady on hers. "Don't thank me. You earned it. I just made sure everyone else saw it too." The words struck deep. Emily turned back to her window, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Outside, the clouds gave way to patches of land, dark forests, winding rivers, clusters of lights that marked towns and cities. Civilization returning beneath them, pulling them back from the endless sky. As the descent deepened, the cabin shifted. The gentle hum grew louder, engines adjusting. The nose tilted downward, and the ground below expanded with breathtaking speed. Emily gripped the armrest, not in fear, but in awe. She remembered how turbulence had once made her shrink, how fear had threatened to undo her. Now, she embraced the sensation of movement, the rush of descent, as a reminder of what she had overcome. Walker noticed, his voice a quiet anchor. "You're different now." She looked at him, startled. "Different? Your eyes," he said simply. "They're not looking down anymore. They're looking ahead." Emily flushed, uncertain how to respond. But she knew he was right. Something inside her had shifted permanently. The wheels extended with a distant clunk, the landing gear preparing for the earth to rise up and meet them. The captain's voice returned, calm and measured. "Flight attendants, please be seated." The plane sank lower, the city lights sharp and dazzling now. Streets formed a glowing grid, headlights crawling like fireflies through veins of asphalt. Emily's chest swelled with a bittersweet mix of emotions. The journey was ending, but the transformation was only beginning. The runway rushed closer, the final moments of suspension stretching into eternity. Then impact. The tires screeched against asphalt, the cabin jolted, and the engines roared in reverse. Passengers gasped, then exhaled in relief as the plane slowed. Cheers and applause rippled through the cabin, a tradition born of gratitude and survival. Emily clapped softly too, her smile genuine. But her applause wasn't only for pilots. It was for herself, for the courage she had found, for the fear she had faced, for the woman she was becoming. The plane taxied slowly, lights flashing across the tarmac. Emily leaned back, letting the moment wash over her. When they finally docked at the gate, seatbelts unclicked in a chaotic chorus. Overhead bins slammed open, bags tumbled out, voices rose in hurried farewells. But Emily remained seated, her hands folded neatly, her heart steady. Walker stood, his frame imposing even in the cramped aisle. He glanced down at her. "Walk with me." She nodded, rising to follow him. Passengers parted without protest, eyes wide with curiosity. Together, they stepped into the jet bridge, leaving the hum of the cabin behind. The terminal stretched before them, bustling with arrivals and reunions. Families embraced, business travelers strode briskly, children tugged at tired parents. Yet Emily felt as though she moved through it all with a kind of clarity. Her senses sharpened. Walker slowed his stride once they reached a quieter corner. He turned to her, his gaze direct. "Emily, today wasn't about me stepping in. It was about you stepping up. Don't forget that." Her throat tightened. "But without you," he shook his head gently. "With me, without me, it doesn't matter. You had the courage all along. All I did was hold up a mirror." She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. His words rang true. The strength had been hers, buried under years of doubt. And now, finally, she believed it. Walker reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn card. He handed it to her. My unit runs mentorship programs for medical trainees who want to work in critical environments, combat zones, disaster relief, air evacuations. If you're serious about flight nursing, call this number. Tell them Walker sent you. Emily stared at the card, her fingers trembling. It was more than an invitation. It was a door wide open into the very future she had dreamed of but never believed she could reach. Her voice broke as she whispered, "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Walker replied, his expression soft but firm. She laughed through her tears, a sound full of release. "Yes." He nodded once, satisfied. Then he stepped back, the faintest smile ghosting across his lips. "Good. Because you belong in the sky. Emily Carter. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." And just like that, he blended into the crowd, his tall frame vanishing into the current of travelers. He didn't wait for thanks, didn't linger for recognition. He had done what he came to do. Emily clutched the card to her chest, her heart thundering with possibility. She turned toward the terminal windows. Beyond the glass, planes taxied, lifted, and soared into the fading light.
For the first time in her life, she didn't see them as machines carrying strangers. She saw them as beacons, as promises. And deep within her, she knew, one day, she would be there. Not as a passenger, not as someone refused, but as someone who belonged in the very heart of the sky.